So, I've worked my way through all of the more modern 3D Gainloft Spider-Man games, from Spider-Man Total Mayhem all the way to Spider-Man Unlimited and everything in between. By the way, check out those videos if you haven't. But if you can believe it, there are still more Spider-Man mobile games to talk about. And to do so, we'll have to go back to a time before the age of the smartphone. Back when every cell phone didn't look practically the same and wasn't just a rectangular screen. Everyone had a different looking device that sometimes had a unique gimmick, like the Motorola Razr, with its sleek and impossibly thin design. The Samsung Upstage, one side cellular device, the other MP3 player. And if you were really cool, you had a Sidekick with its rad flippy screen. Man, I was always so jealous of everyone that had one of those. All I had was an LG Revere. Come on, do something cool. Do you know what's something really cool that my phone can do today? Play Marvel Strike Force, which this video is sponsored by. Marvel Strike Force is a dynamic squad-based RPG that brings the Marvel Universe to life, where players assemble powerful teams of Marvel heroes and villains to battle iconic enemies in epic combat with endless team combinations and strategic gameplay, to take on threats like Doctor Doom and Apocalypse, as you level up your characters, unlock gear, and collect resources. And you can use my link in the description or scan my QR code to download the game for free and unlock free characters. Marvel Strike Force is always blowing me away with how many characters are constantly being added, from all-time greats like Hulk and Wolverine to characters that aren't as much of a household name like Longshot and Sasquatch. If you're a new player, you can unlock up to 17 total characters within the first 30 days, including Spider-Man, Deadpool, Thor, Captain America, and more. It's really fun growing your ever-expanding roster of heroes and villains and seeing them fight along with each other in different game modes like Cosmic Crucible, where you go head-to-head against other players in a tournament. And this month there's a brand new mode called Battle World. Battle World is a new PvE mode where you can participate alongside your alliance. To break in this new Battle World game mode, you can use some of the recently released characters like Blade and his team of Night Stalkers. I know Halloween just passed, but that doesn't mean the spooky season is over. Seriously, try telling that to Blade. For him, spooky season is all year round. To celebrate, you can redeem the promo code Halloween to get 100 shards for Zombie Iron Man, 600k gold, and 480 L2 training modules. Don't forget to use my link or scan my QR code to download the game, and thank you so much to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video. Everyone remembers the dime a dozen movie tie-in games way back just before the 2010s. You get a summer blockbuster like Van Helsing or Shark's Tale, and you can bet your life that a video game based on that movie is tagging along. Different versions too, like ones for the Game Boy Advance, developed by entirely different studios that are sometimes better than the main console version. But the ones that are always easily overlooked are the Java flip phone versions of these games. I remember seeing these things all the time in magazine ads. Not just for movie license games too, but also big names in the video game landscape like Tomb Raider, Ratchet & Clank, and holy shit, there's a Metal Gear one? Okay, I'm definitely covering that one at some point. But today we're rounding things out with the old Webslinger and going through all of his Java games. If this is the kind of thing that interests you, why not subscribe, give a like, comment your favorite Java game down below, and perhaps consider joining my YouTube membership. Any and all kinds of support are greatly appreciated. With that, let's jump into the first game, Spider-Man vs. Doc Ock. This one was developed by Vicarious Visions and is based on the peak cinema that is Spider-Man 2. In this game, you get to do just what the title implies. You go after Doc Ock in a set of 3 minigames to test your reflexes and patience. The first minigame is... wait a minute. Isn't that the same Spider-Man sprite from Mysterio's Menace on GBA? He has the same run animation, albeit with like 10 less frames, but yeah, I think it is. Ah yes, this makes sense. Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace was also developed by Vicarious Visions. Anyway, the first minigame is a runner type of playstyle. Spidey automatically runs to the right, and your goal is to simply swing over any gaps and shoot web balls at incoming goons. Their super slow frame rate makes this trivial, but the somewhat recognizable Spider-Man theme song playing in the background kept me entertained. At the end of the level, we find MJ tied to a water tower, and Spidey gives us a wholesome Super Mario World end of the level thumbs up. Good God! Look at the girth on Octavius's tentacles! The next minigame is another runner, but it changes perspectives to run straight ahead. It takes place on subway tracks, and the goal is to dodge incoming trains. Duh! This time we can move side to side and jump up to the ceiling to a wall crawl, where we can also come across these metal barricades that can cause us to lose a life. Dodging the trains is pretty easy because the light that signals their approach gives us a generous window to move out of their way. Again, just kinda trivial. Watch out, Spidey, he's right behind you! The next minigame actually has us facing Doc Ock head on. The goal is to web up his tentacles as they pop up in these designated spots before they get a chance to lunge at us. They pop up at random, but once you web up one of them, it gets easier because now that spot is taken up by a webbed up tentacle, and the others now only have the leftover 2 spots. So they're a lot easier to predict. Once they're all webbed up, we shoot one onto Doc Ock's face and the day is saved. But not actually. See, now that you've cleared all 3 minigames, we go up a level where things get faster. And this is where the game actually starts to get interesting, as it provides a bit of a challenge. I really dig how the level set in the rooftop changes the time of day as a way to visualize our progression. By level 3, the game actually got fast enough to the point where I had to focus after getting a game over screen a couple times and was forced to start from the beginning. Also, in level 3, the minigame where you shoot webs at Ock's tentacles, the rules switch up on you a little bit. Not only do the tentacles move faster, they also bring in a 4th tentacle, and they can overlap each other in spots where there's already a webbed up tentacle. So that really threw me for a loop. And that's the actual end of the game. Every time you beat a level, you unlock one of the minigames to play in arcade mode, where the minigames take on an endless format, and you can test your skills and shoot for the high score. Spider-Man vs. Doc Ock is a fine mobile game. Its simplicity is appropriate for these devices, but it does feel uninspired. I'm sure you can find these exact types of minigames in a ton of other games.
Next!
This one is simply called Spider-Man and was developed by India Games. Ooh, that Ultimate Spider-Man cover variant is so iconic. The setup for this one is straightforward. The Green Goblin has hired a bunch of thugs to... Okay, those are definitely thugs from Mysterio's Menace. Anyway, they're causing mayhem around the city, and it's up to the wall crawler to stop them and the Green Meanie. We once again have a recycled Spidey from Mysterio's Menace, and even the health bar icon. This one is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, which I have to say must have been pretty cool to have on a mobile device back in the day. I'd describe it as a lesser version of Mysterio's Menace, or even something like Spider-Man 2: The Sinister Six on Game Boy Color. The game plays at like 10 frames a second, the controls are very limited, and it all feels very janky. Like the way Spidey's swing has no arc to it, it's just a straightforward motion. The way he can't seem to crawl downwards, like he has to crawl in reverse in order to descend. And the way these web fluid pickups look less like spiders and more like scarabs or something. This looks more like a ROM hack rather than an official game, but hey, it's still a full-on level-based Spider-Man side-scroller with a combat system, web-slinging, wall crawling, and different environments. It's pretty nifty, and I enjoyed my time with it. The goal of each level is to rescue a set number of civilians before heading to the exit. At the end of each level, you get scored depending on how many enemies you defeated and how long it took you to beat the level. At the end of the game, you face off against the Green Goblin, and I think this is the only original sprite that was put together for this game because it looks noticeably worse from every other one. Spider-Man and all the thugs have this pseudo 3D look with shading that gives them a bit of depth, and Gobby looks like he was pulled from a Game Boy Color game. Okay, I must have pissed off Green Goblin with that last comment because his boss fight actually presented a challenge for me. Gobby throws pumpkin bombs at you and they hone in pretty intensely. That and the way they move in space doesn't quite make sense sometimes. Like Gobby will throw down a bomb, then I'll try to swing over it, but the bomb somehow tracks my movement despite it being already in motion. I guess that's that Oscorp Industries tech, huh? Thankfully, this game offers checkpoints and I didn't have to worry about starting the game from the beginning when I lost all my lives. Seriously, thank you for that. So, in order to do damage, you have to lure Gobby down and attack him once he's at ground level, which is easier said than done because the window in which he stays on the ground is very brief. But once you take him up, the day is saved and you can proudly type out your name to add to the leaderboard. Honestly, not a bad game. Yeah, it's very short and feels amateurish, but in a charming way that makes me look back at my time with it without any regret.
Next!
The Amazing Spider-Man Webslinger. I love this startup screen art, as well as the main menu. Spidey looks so heroic and ready to charge you $2.99 for this game. That's what these games cost back then, right? This is a rhythm-based web swinging game, as the title implies. It's essentially a simplified Guitar Hero. Spider-Man automatically swings to the right and you have this curved bar next to you where a yellow circle will show up and you have to time your button press as the circle passes through the small window. Getting subsequent perfect button presses will increase the window, making it easier to score points, but botching these prompts will decrease the window in size. So it kinda acts like a health bar because if you keep messing up, you will eventually be kindly treated to a face full of pavement. Along the way, you'll snatch up stolen purses and other items for bonus points. Spidey does these admittedly cool animations that don't require any additional input from you, but I didn't really get to enjoy them all that much because my eyes were locked into that meter pretty much every second of my time with this game. As you progress, the game will dial things up by introducing different prompts like directional buttons you have to press, as well as double taps, rather than just the simple middle button press on your hypothetical ancient flip phone. Playing this game got a little disorienting for me at times because the bar where the prompts are presented to you are attached to Spider-Man. In other words, as Spider-Man is sporadically bouncing and flailing around the screen, so is the thing you have your eyes locked onto, and it made me feel a little woozy. I don't know if I'm just getting old or if this is something you youngsters might also experience, but either way, don't tell me if you don't because I don't want to feel old. In order to progress to the next level, you have to meet a minimum score requirement, and this was never a challenge for me. It's really easy to pick up the rhythm of these prompts, so I was nailing them like clockwork. In the final level, you fight Green Goblin, and I use that word very lightly because the gameplay doesn't change at all. You just get to see Green Goblin on screen be his silly little self as you do the same thing you've been doing for 8 or so levels. This is a fine game. It's exactly the type of game you'd imagine Spider-Man would get on these devices at some point, so it checks off that box. The visuals are pretty good, but besides that, there's not much else here.
Next!
Ultimate Spider-Man. I imagine this one came out at the same time as the one everyone remembers fondly, but man, let me tell you, this one sucks. Easily the worst of the bunch I've played. The controls feel awful. Spider-Man seems to control on a sort of grid system, like when you tap the directional button to move, he commits to a preset distance that feels way more than it should be, and it just makes navigating these levels a nightmare. And while web swinging has a proper arc in this game, I could never get the hang of it. I always ended up slamming into the wall or ground, so I feel like I never got to fully enjoy the web slinging in this game. Jumping also feels imprecise. The hit detection for combat is really strict. You have to be positioned perfectly against the enemy you're facing, otherwise you'll be straight up whiffing your punches. It doesn't help that whenever Spider-Man attacks, he lurches forward, so you'll have to realign yourself back in front of the enemy to continue attacking him. It's really annoying. Your objective in each level is always the same. You have to track down Venom and defeat him to then move on to the next environment to do the exact same thing. Venom is free to roam these levels at his will, so the game kinda has this dynamic feel to it that's kinda cool. especially since levels can be pretty expansive and you can randomly encounter other villains like Shocker and Green Goblin. You don't have to defeat them in order to beat the level. Your main goal is always to just defeat Venom, so that also adds a cool dynamic element to these levels. You know, running into other villains from Spidey's Rogues Gallery in the wild gives this game a comic booky feel. But I just wish the game had a more traditional, linear, and structured level format, because this experience very quickly becomes repetitive when every level asks you to do the same thing. And I think there's like 12 of them. I didn't even bother beating the whole thing because I was so frustrated with its controls and wonky hit detection. When you fight Venom, it feels like a toss-up. Maybe you'll get lucky enough that Venom doesn't move all that much and you can land a good amount of cheap shots, or maybe you'll spend the entire time wrestling with the controls and placing yourself in the right spot. I thought that starting the level and having to track down wherever Venom is within the level was a cool element. You know, it adds a bit of pressure since he feeds on helpless civilians while he's out and about. But then I realized that this sensor button snaps the camera to wherever he currently is. So there goes that. Not unlike the mainline console version, this game also lets you play as Venom. The gameplay remains pretty much the same, although Venom has his own unique abilities like this tendril attack, and he's able to regain energy by feeding on civilians, and he has the ability to charge up his jump. But the level design is the same except the roles are reversed. Now you have to track down Spider-Man and defeat him to progress to the next level. Yeah, don't play this one. Hard pass.
Next!
Spider-Man 3. Ah, yes. Once again based on peak cinema. What if I told you that the best version of the Spider-Man 3 video game is indeed found on Java-based cell phones? Don't believe me? Please, follow me on this road of based takes. Spider-Man 3 absolutely blew my mind with how much it feels like a genuine full-fledged game you'd play on GBA. First off, the visuals look fantastic. This Spider-Man sprite is such a good translation of the Raimi iteration of the costume. It's detailed with shading and has a darker color palette that feels closer to how he looks in these movies. He's also animated really well. Levels are beautifully put together with detail and are structured in a traditional linear format. Combat feels simple but intuitive for the type of device you were meant to play this on. Punching enemies is simply done by pressing the middle button, but if you're at a distance from your target, pressing the same button will result in Spidey shooting webs at the enemy. You can also perform special moves after stunning an enemy that has Spidey do a cool finisher animation. And you go on to unlock more attacks at the end of most levels. By the end of the game, I was impressed with how many attacks I had at my disposal. I had a slam down attack, a swing kick, a move that has Spidey perch on enemies' shoulders that then allows you to bounce between them, a satisfying web throw that has the camera follow the thug as they plummet to the ground. That guy's gonna be okay, right? The game also allows you to string some of these attacks together, so there's room for experimentation. Something that I wasn't expecting and was pleasantly surprised when I came across it was that enemies actually have collision. So you can toss them onto boxes in the environment or even other enemies. Thugs are also not brain dead. If you use a particular attack too often, they'll start blocking it. So it's best to make the most of the moves available to you. Maybe not the most impressive thing in the grand scheme of video games, but I don't know. When I think about the type of device this game was developed for and how many people probably overlooked it, these efforts go a long way to me. Traversal also feels really good and intuitive. Tapping up mid-jump has Spidey web swing, and while I never found myself web swinging all that often because levels are designed kinda constrictive, when I did swing around, it felt like an easy to control and telegraph motion. I love Spider-Man's jump in this game. Pressing up on the directional pad doesn't have him jump straight up. Instead, you jump up and forward. This is such a smart decision to make for a game that would be played on a cell phone from this time, because pressing up to jump and then awkwardly sliding your thumb to the right arrow button to jump forward would result in frustration more than anything. So again, this is an intuitive design. I also like that this jump mechanic gives Spider-Man a weighty feel. I think this is how jumping worked in those old Prince of Persia games. Having to commit to a full jump forward gives a video game character so much physicality. You can also double tap up to web zip to the ceiling, or double tap left or right to quickly swing to the nearest wall. These are classic Spider-Man antics in video games, and it's awesome to see them here in a humble Java mobile game. As you'd expect, the game adapts the events of the movie, albeit in a very abridged manner. But I think this might be the only game that acknowledges the plot point of MJ and Harry having an entanglement. Check this out. Oh, Peter, why can't you be more like Harry? More like Harry? Damn, that's ruthless, MJ. A lot of other plot beats barely get a mention, like Sandman's entire plot thread. Though that was neglected in pretty much every version of the Spider-Man 3 video game. There's absolutely zero build-up for the symbiote too. It looks like it just magically shows up one night. After nearly killing Harry, it just manifests out of nowhere. I mean, yeah, I'm sure the intention was that the symbiote was perhaps creeping around the corner in an alley and was waiting for the right moment when Spidey is filled with dark thoughts and negative emotions, and then leapt at that opportunity to consume him. Okay, I guess I explained it pretty well there, huh? Nah, it still looks like it shows up out of nowhere. The black suit has its own kinks and quirks. Most notably, your health bar steadily decreases, and you have to beat up bad guys or destroy objects in the environment to replenish health. So once you unlock the black suit, the game suddenly implements a time limit to levels, and I didn't love that. It just felt unnecessary. Destroying objects or defeating enemies to replenish my ever-decreasing health never felt like a compelling mechanic, just a mild annoyance. It was never pressing enough for me to feel like I should keep up a fast pace as I make my way through a level, so it just felt like, what's the point? Had the game presented me an option like use the black suit for a significantly higher damage output, but with the caveat of a rapidly decreasing health bar so you indeed have to press the pedal to the metal when using the black suit, or just rock out with the classic red and blues for a lower damage output but, not having to worry about any penalties. But then again, it wouldn't really be Spider-Man 3 if someone goes the whole game without using the black suit, so there's that whole debacle. And of course, where there's a symbiote, and Eddie Brock shortly follows. Or at least, he should. And here we have... Wait a minute, what the hell? Eddie Brock? More like Michael Keaton. Who the hell is that? That is certainly not Topher Grace. Somebody get Jude Law his royalties for letting these guys use his likeness for the Spider-Man 3 Java game. Speaking in regards to the boss fights here, the only ones I really enjoyed were the ones against Harry. He gets special treatment here, having 2 boss fights, which again I think makes this the only Spider-Man 3 game to accurately adapt that aspect of the movie. He flies around with his Gilder... sorry. He flies around with your glider... no, okay, again. He flies around with his trailer... son of a... Is anyone gonna get that joke? The first Sandman fight is pretty lame. All you do is chase him around and land a single attack on him, then follow him to whatever next spot he pops up at. The second phase has a more interesting gimmick to it. You have to get him to punch these water towers that'll eventually fall apart and douse him in water, doing a ton of damage. Venom's fight has a cool concept, but the execution fails completely. MJ is high up on a rooftop, and Venom is making his way up the side of this building to go after her. The idea is to stun him by making noise with these trash cans and knock him down to stop him from reaching MJ, and I imagine the idea was to keep that back and forth up for a bit. As the fight carries on, Venom gets closer and closer to MJ, but you keep impeding his progress by stunning him and knocking him down a few levels. But I think I exploited this fight by just timing my punches on this one trash can to the point where Venom was grounded for 90% of the fight. So it wasn't very compelling. But he lives! Venom doesn't blow up to Kingdom Come in this version of Spider-Man 3. What did I tell you? Based takes, baby. When you beat the game, you get to pick between the black suit and classic costume before starting any level, which is always a nice bonus. I think Spider-Man 3 on Java is a great game. It's the first of these that feels like a complete video game that I would wholeheartedly recommend to Spider-Man fans.
Next!
Spider-Man Toxic City. I got a lot of requests to cover this one after starting this journey of Spider-Man mobile games, and at a glance I can see why. If Spider-Man 3 started taking these Java games in a direction that resembled games you'd expect to see on more conventional platforms, then Toxic City firmly establishes itself as a full-on proper beat-em-up like Streets of Rage or Double Dragon. This was Gameloft's foray into the world of Spider-Man mobile games, and much like their forgotten gem Total Mayhem, Spider-Man Toxic City is based on the Ultimate line of comics, which means we follow a younger Peter Parker still in high school, dealing with issues like being late to the school dance and having a 7-foot-tall goblin mutant monster terrorizing him around every corner. By the time this game came out, cell phones with touch controls were starting to roll out, which means that we have a much bigger screen to move around in and an overall better format for a brawler that gives us a wider view of the stages we'll be bashing thugs in. This also gave players on-screen virtual buttons that thankfully I didn't have to deal with because they just never provide that tactile feedback I need when playing video games. The game opens with Spider-Man going about a usual day in Manhattan, taking out street thugs, and right off the bat you can instantly see how much more combat has been dialed up since Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man attacks much faster and is more agile. You can snap to enemies in a flash, air juggle them, and quickly dash down from the air with a dive kick attack. Much like Spider-Man 3, you can web enemies from a distance with the same button you would melee them with, making the most of what's available on a cell phone and not cluttering the screen with more buttons. Now, the problem is that while Toxic City surely looks like a more proper brawler and combat has gotten a visual upgrade with more bombastic looking attacks, that's the best thing about it. It looks good. Combat never felt satisfying to me, and I think the problem is very simple and obvious. The game lacks satisfying feedback. Of course, I wouldn't expect a cell phone from this time, much less a software that emulates these games to give me rumble feedback, but this made me realize how much of an impact auditory feedback also makes. To be fair, this might have been an issue with my emulation setup because there was music, but not hearing a sound effect whenever I would land hits on enemies really made combat feel unsatisfying. What's the point of these big flashy moves if I don't feel the impact? It made me feel like a spectator rather than being the one that's pummeling these goons. Also, even though it's cool to see Spider-Man move more closely to how you would expect him to, the combat system lacks depth when compared to Spider-Man 3. It feels really automated, not requiring more than simple 2 or 3 inputs, which surely makes for an easier experience that may be more appropriate for a cell phone. But I was really impressed with how much agency Spider-Man 3 gave me with the attacks I wanted to use. In Total Mayhem, it feels like you get far fewer choices, and again, like you're a lot less involved with combat. Not to mention that you don't get to unlock any more attacks. You can upgrade the damage you do and unlock one-button special attacks, but nothing that really lets you experiment with combat. I mentioned earlier that this game minimizes the need for any extra buttons by having the one attack button allow you to both attack enemies and grab them with your webs, but maybe adding just one more button for either dedicated web attacks or maybe even kicking based attacks would have given the combat here some much needed depth. Once we take out some baddies in this opening area, we push along and get introduced to one of the special segments that are dispersed throughout the game, wall crawling sections. These are pretty simple and aren't something you haven't seen in other Spider-Man games before. You simply crawl up the side of the building as you dodge incoming debris and the like. Simple, but a nice way to break up the pace of these levels. Eventually, we reach the cause behind all this mayhem, Rhino, and we prepare for our first boss fight. This fight plays out as you'd expect. Rhino charges at you, and you have to dodge him until he causes some blocks of concrete to fall on the arena. You have to grab one of these blocks and toss it at him to temporarily stun him. This is your chance to do some damage by wailing at him while he's in this state. I didn't think the fight against Rhino was anything special, but it wasn't bad as an introductory adversary to get into the swing of things. In between levels, you'll occasionally get a bonus stage where you can collect spider tokens to level up your stats. These stages have you madly swing around as you scramble to pick up what feels like loose change. This is what these bonus stages always felt like to me, ever since I first played one in Super Mario World. The spider tokens go towards your upgrades, and you can also find comic book covers here, which are this game's collectibles. You know, I hate to already bash another aspect of this game, because I'm probably gonna piss some people off that might have some nostalgia for this one, but web swinging feels pretty bad here. There's something about the way Spider-Man moves when he's swinging that makes me feel like I have no control. Whenever you want to change directions, he does this twirl animation that makes it tricky to gauge how far up the screen he's gonna go. And it makes collecting these tokens harder than it needs to be. But maybe that's the point. Thankfully, web swinging isn't a big focus of the game, as you spend 90% of the time just walking along environments beating up all sorts of enemies. One thing I can positively say about Toxic City is that it feels like a narratively eventful game. Not to get ahead of myself, but between the lower stakes and personal stuff like disappointing MJ by not making it to the school dance on time, and villains running amok throughout the city as the Goblin plans more sinister schemes, this game's story feels like a classic 6-issue run. Not a massive comic book event, but just another day in the life of Spider-Man. After MJ blows us off, we find some ugly monstrosities invading the school. We get to leap into action in just our regular Peter Parker duds, and this is pretty awesome. Throwing in a level where we get to fight bad guys out of costume is always an easy way to win brownie points from me. Getting to fight in high school hallways is also a nice change of scenery. I can't think of another Spider-Man game that has a level set in a school apart from the recent Marvel Spider-Man 2. The Green Goblin crashes the party, and we have a mini boss fight that's pretty straightforward. Gobby jumps around and hurls fireballs at you that are pretty easy to avoid, and there's no special gimmick to this boss encounter. After the fight, the Goblin hints at some experiments he's working on to create an army of superhumans using the Oz formula. The next couple levels has us sweeping up more villains that have broken out of the Triskelion and are causing panic all around the city. Let's run through them. First up is Electro. His fight was one of the better ones in my opinion. I should say that the bar is pretty low for these boss fights. None of them really offered a challenge, so I'm more so judging them based on how many elements they managed to introduce within their very limited time. And Electro has different attack patterns that are very easy to dodge, but he introduces a new one as you get closer to defeating him, and I thought that was something. The Vulture was an absolute punk. All he does is dive bomb towards you, which is really easy to dodge. Then he hilariously face plants on the rooftop, where you'll then be able to kick him while he's down. After we're done putting away the escapees, Peter is able to, well, inexplicably just find out where the Goblin's secret lab is located. He's just click-clacking away at a keyboard and goes, "Aha! Found you, Gobby." Okay, sure. For the next level, we get another change in scenery set in the Goblin's secret lab. I want to drive home how much I really appreciated this game having a variety of levels. Even though most of them are set in the city, whether it be the streets or rooftops, the change in color palette goes a long way. And when you do get a drastic change in scenery, like a school or underground lab, it just gives this game's short runtime a fresh and well-paced feeling. Even though I praise this game's levels and overall colorful aesthetic, I gotta say I'm not the biggest fan of how the characters look. They have that marionette look where you can very clearly see the divide in their limbs and joints. I imagine this maybe makes it easier for the developers to animate these characters, but it's just an unflattering and goofy look in my opinion. In this fight, we fight hordes of Goblin's experiments, and to no surprise, we find out that he's planning on exposing the city to the serum to turn everyone into a Goblin mutant. Exposing the city to some messed up substance because you think it's the next step in human evolution. A timeless tale indeed. The Goblin attempts to mutate Spidey with the Oz serum, but already having been exposed to it back when he was bitten by the spider, it has no effect on Peter. The Goblin takes off, and once again, using his special ability of click-clacking on a keyboard, Peter is able to track down a machine in New Jersey that he suspects the Goblin to use to expose the city. Goblin monsters are now running wild throughout the city, and as we make our way to Jersey, we go through a gauntlet of all the supervillains we faced thus far. Even though the boss fights play out the same way they did when you first faced them, it was pretty cool getting to fight them back to back, and it did add at least just a little bit of a challenge. Quick! Post an MJ level to scare away an Insomniac hater. All kidding aside, this is cool. This is what I mean when I say this game does a good job of keeping the pace feeling brisk and fresh. This is a one-off scooter driving level, and I thought it was a clever way of getting MJ involved. Spider-Man catches up to the Goblin atop a skyscraper where he has this machine set up, and MJ arrives just in the nick of time to pass out. Oh man, this goes kinda hard. A final fight against the monstrous Green Goblin as an unmasked Peter Parker during a stormy night? Yeah, it's a small aspect, but these small touches go a long way for me. A level where you're in full Peter Parker civilian clothes, a short scooter riding section as MJ, and now a final level with an unmasked Peter Parker fit? 2 out of 3 of those are simple cosmetic changes, but I guess I'm just a simple man. After making our way back to the top of the building, we once again face off against the Green Goblin for the final boss fight of the game. Meanwhile, MJ succumbs to the serum and transforms into one of Goblin's mutants, but she's able to keep control and uses her strength to fight off the Goblin alongside Peter. Damn, she's a keeper. Destroying Goblin's machine conveniently transforms everyone back to their human form, and that's the end of our adventure. But before we close out, we gotta make amends for the dance we missed out on in the beginning of the game and get jiggy with MJ. After beating the game, you can replay any mission, but I found it strange that the game doesn't let you continue to contribute spider tokens towards your different stats. It seems like you're locked with whatever ones you decided to upgrade on your initial playthrough. There are some extra modes to play, like a survival mode and achievements to seek out. I like Spider-Man Toxic City. The combat definitely could have used some more complexity, but the game has a really short runtime. You can beat it in around an hour or so maybe going all out with an extensive moves list is not really necessary. Gameloft would go on to develop 2 more 2D Spider-Man beat-em-ups as tie-ins for the Mark Webb movies, so let's check them out.
Next!
Now what if I told you that the best version of the Amazing Spider-Man is the Java one? Please. Follow me on this road of base takes. Okay, that is not Emma Stone. Is that Paris Hilton? Gameloft's next Spider-Man game is a step up from Toxic City in every way, I would say. Combat feels a lot better with it providing more satisfying feedback. Again, not sure if there was just something wrong with the emulation in Toxic City, but here we have proper sound effects when landing punches, and not only that, but the way Spider-Man is animated just gives those attacks more of an oomph. You also have proper combos this time around. Once again, you can uppercut enemies straight into the atmosphere to then follow that up with some air juggles, but more significantly, Gameloft implemented a dedicated web button that allows you to do some crazy over-the-top web-based attacks like this big whacking hammer thing and this spinny ground pound move. You can also do different attacks by pressing one of the directional buttons mid-combos, and this just gives you so much more agency when you're catching thieves just like flies. It also helps that we have different enemy types that each have their own most effective strategy when it comes to taking them down. Charging up your attack is effective against these big Chungus type enemies. Using your webs works well against these enemies with shields, since you can yank them from their arms and throw it back at them like you're a star-spangled man with a plan. And using your ultimate attack is best against, well, everyone. It's the dedicated, alright, I'm fed up with this combat encounter, can we just move on to the next part of the level button. I did run into some issues with combat. In order to attack an enemy, they have to be highlighted, and that's represented by this circular symbol underneath them, which also acts as their health bar. If you try to attack an enemy and they don't have that circle beneath them, your attacks just won't register. And I found myself on a number of occasions whiffing punches because that damn health bar just wouldn't show up. So I'd awkwardly adjust myself on the stage until it decided to show up, and it seriously put a hamper on the pace of combat. Upgrades feel a bit more meaningful this time around, with not only allowing you to increase the damage you do, but also give you some new abilities like the aforementioned web attacks, ultimate special attacks, and the ability to heal Wolverine style by just standing there and letting your built differently superhero body do its thing. I thought the levels in Toxic City were paced out pretty well, and somehow Gameloft managed to improve that aspect even further. Making your way through a level as you mostly beat up bad guys never gets stale because There's a bunch of little interesting goodies sprinkled throughout each level. The game is devoid of any genuine platforming or web-slinging sections. Instead, you come across these context-sensitive spots that have Spidey automatically swing or jump to the next section of the level, but the way they play around with the foreground and background, having Spider-Man swing toward or away from the camera, adds a fun element to how you progress through a stage. Wall crawling sections make a return, and yeah, there's not much to say about that besides that Spider-Man's wall crawling animation looks much better than the one in Toxic City. Yeesh, what was up with that? You've also got these scripted sequences that just kinda give this game a more elevated sense of quality. Like this brief section within a museum that has Spidey stealthily crawling on the ceiling as these poor New York City SWAT guys get murdered. Jesus, Peter. With great power? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the car door surfing levels. You'll be avoiding incoming obstacles like barrels, cars, and missiles by sliding to side, jumping over them, or ducking underneath them. It's nice to have the variety, but they're so trivial and go on for a little too long that I was just itching for the next level to come along. Acting as a sort of collectible are these photo op icons that have Spider-Man strike a goofy pose and take a picture for the bugle presumably. I thought these were really fun and charming, even though Spidey eventually repeats some poses. There are enough of them that seeing him ham it up for the camera always got a chuckle out of me. You also come across civilians tied up, and freeing them often rewards you with cheeseburgers, french fries, and fried chicken. He's just like me, for real. Cutscenes are really well animated. They really dialed them up for this one, having some dope ass action sequences with QTE sprinkled throughout. I've shared my stance on QTEs before. I like them. I think they're a fine way of getting the player involved in more cinematic and intricately animated sequences that you otherwise won't be able to pull off during gameplay, at least in video games of this time. Most of these caught me by surprise. I could never see them coming and I failed like half of them. But there's no real penalty for failing them besides looking like a total ass and missing out on some bonus spider tokens. Even though characters have that marionette look like the ones in Toxic City, it's not as obvious as it is in that last game, and overall the game's graphics are a lot better. It has this pseudo painted look with sprites having the soft, smoothed out look to them. It's really easy on the eyes. The game adapts the basic premise of Doc Connors wanting to evolve the human race to that of the cold-blooded type. But what makes this iteration special is that Sandman and Venom are here. They're Connors' lackeys that provide him with the necessary components for his experiment, and while Sandman certainly fits that bill, although he usually works for figures of higher power like a Kingpin or Doc Ock, Venom is such a random choice. Having symbiotes in tie-in games specifically based on the Amazing Spider-Man movies is so fascinating to me. Because Venom and Carnage are such iconic and popular villains in Spidey's rogues that require certain backstories before being introduced, seeing them just show up in a video game gives me such whiplash. I still think the Amazing Spider-Man 2 for smartphone mobile devices handled the symbiote inclusion the best without having Peter go through his black suit arc. By the way, check out that video if you haven't. But I still enjoyed the interactions between Spidey and Venom here. They're nothing groundbreaking, the game actually treats their relationship as if they've known each other for a while, and the dialogue between them was fun. Sandman was actually a huge standout for me. He easily has the best boss fights. They have these neat phases, like this one where he turns into a giant face all mummy style. Another one where you have to run away from him as he throws sand constructs your way. And finally, one last phase where he conjures up a big sandstorm and you have to throw containers of water at him to weaken him. It very much reminded me of his boss fight in Shattered Dimensions. I wish I could say the other bosses were as fun, but their fights were really basic. You have to look out for attack patterns and just hit them with simple attack combos once you have an opening. Though it was cool getting to see an Eddie Brock sprite, I for sure thought they wouldn't bother putting one together. I really like the Amazing Spider-Man for Java phones. I'm at a point with these games where I wish I was able to play this one at the time it came out because I'm really impressed with its quality. Hey, did they forget to chroma key Doc Connors' arm out in this scene? Why does he have just a green, normal, human-looking arm? Is that a reference to the behind-the-scenes photos of Rhys Ifans while shooting TASM? Like, look, it has to be, right?
Next!
What if I told you that the best version of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the Java one? Do I genuinely mean this, or am I just keeping up a bit? Okay, that is not Emma Stone. Is that Ashley Tisdale? Well, truth be told, TASM 2 for Java is in fact not the best version of the game, because this one is a significant step back from the last game. The visuals are without a doubt the best ones thus far. Spider-Man and everyone else's sprites look great and they're animated sensationally. But we go back to combat feeling way too automated. All you have to do is mindlessly mash the button and Spider-Man goes pow, bang, biff, wham! He's like a squirrel on caffeine with the way he bounces around the screen attacking goons with barely any involvement from me. He even grabs items that can be used against enemies like trash cans and the like without my say. He just does it. There aren't any combos or specific inputs you can do for different attacks. The only other thing you can do is grab enemies and toss them. But besides that, combat boils down to just mashing this one button. Like the prior games, you have a handful of ultimate attacks, but the way these always work is that you just have to press one button, so, it doesn't really add much else. That's just how ultimate attacks work. The other button is a dedicated dodge button, but it's pretty much obsolete because of how fast and chaotically Spider-Man bounces between enemies. The only time it really came in handy were during some of the boss fights that allowed you to easily dodge what would otherwise be some nasty hits to the wall crawler. But I wish that dodge button was replaced with, again, a web button or a kicking button to add more options to combat. There have been some improvements, like the prior games, you get special segments where gameplay switches up a bit. The surfing level makes a comeback in a subway chase sequence, and it's a bit better this time around because it's faster and more hazards are thrown at you at once. A new addition are dedicated web swinging sections that are a vast improvement from the ones in Toxic City. Spidey automatically progresses to the right of the screen, and you can adjust your swing art by just holding down the action button and letting go at different points. It works just like you'd imagine a 2D Spider-Man Unlimited would play. These were pretty fun, though it was tough to see incoming obstacles because Spider-Man moves so fast here and you only have so much screen real estate before whatever incoming hazard is all up in your face. One of my favorite levels of the game was one that had me jumping from car to car as I dodged incoming drones and energy blasts. You have to be really specific about when you jump to the next car because if you do so too early, you might end up getting hit by an incoming drone. The photo op collectibles make a return and they're a bit more engaging because rather than being a simple collectible that triggers a silly animation, you get a minigame that has you tapping the screen to keep the camera reticle in a specific zone before the timer runs out. If you manage to do so, you get a bunch of spider tokens that go towards upgrades. Honestly, I prefer the photo op collectibles from the last game because the animations were way more charming and funny. Here, I can't even pay attention to whatever Spider-Man is doing for the camera because I'm so focused on the camera reticle minigame. Lastly, there are two of these, I guess what I would call turret sections? Spider-Man firmly plants himself in the middle of the screen and he automatically fires off web balls, rapid fire like a madman. You gotta drag your finger, or in my case, my mouse, to aim your web balls, and it just doesn't feel very good. It never felt precise and like there was a massive delay when dragging my mouse across the screen to change Spidey's line of fire. Easily the most frustrating part of the game. I was stuck here for a little bit. The story here is even simpler than the games that preceded this one. The villains here are after an element simply known as Isotope to bolster their abilities. Electro wants to juice himself up even further, Mysterio is here and he wants to conjure up more believable illusions, and the Green Goblin wants to... Honestly, the Green Goblin was just being an asshole. There's nothing interesting here narrative-wise. It was cool getting to see Mysterio though, since he was locked away in the smartphone version of TASM 2 in a game mode that needed servers to be online, and that game's services have long been shut down. His level is a standout one since he uses his mastery of illusion to whip up some pretty trippy sequences, like ones that have the streets of New York City collapsing, a fight against Spider-Man doppelgangers, and I also really like his goons. They have some spiffy outfits. His boss fight was pretty underwhelming though. All you have to do is fight a couple of his henchmen, dodge some of his projectiles, and then just wail on him while he's idling. And it's pretty much the same formula when it comes to fighting Electro. The Green Goblin's fight was undoubtedly the most challenging. His health bar takes pretty long to dwindle down, and his attack patterns require more focus, as not only do you have to dodge incoming fire from his glider, but you also have to deal with these Oscorp Goblin dog things. Given that every other version of the TASM 2 video game doesn't even bother including Gwen, I was on edge with how close this game was getting to recreating that brutal moment in the movie. You know the one. Here, the Goblin kidnaps Gwen, Peter desperately chases after him, and Gobby sets Gwen down dangerously close to the edge of this building. Are they actually gonna do it? Nah, we defeat Goblin, carelessly turn our back to him, and rescue Gwen. Hey Peter, you know you left the maniacal monster unbound and who can easily get away. No? You want to rescue your girlfriend? Oh yeah, I get it. You know, just a heads up. I was really hoping for the last 2D Spider-Man beat 'em up from Gameloft to be a grand slam, but it just feels like it took one step forward and 2 steps back. The web swinging sections are a nice addition, but combat, the most prominent element of the game, is way too streamlined, and it's boring because of that.
Next!
For the last game, we're switching gears and not just having another 2D beat 'em up. Spider-Man Ultimate Power is a 2D runner, very much in the vein of Jetpack Joyride. You Spider-Man Unlimited enjoyers might get a kick out of this one. Yeah, to be frank, there's not much to say about this one except that you automatically run and swing to the right of the screen, and you have to jump over any gaps and obstacles coming your way. You got the web swinging elements from TASM 2 making a return, and to give this game some credit, it does feel a bit tighter here since it is a much bigger focus of this game. I was impressed with how involved I felt with combat, even more so than I did in Spider-Man Unlimited. Taking out enemies requires more than just a simple swipe or tap of the screen. It requires multiple taps of the screen. Yeah, I know I just gave TASM 2 a lot of flack for not having a more intricate combat system, but to be fair, combat is typically not a focus in these runner games, so I appreciated the fact that you can do a multi-hit combo on enemies here. You won't simply just be running to the finish line when you embark on these cardio sessions either. You have a mission map here, and each level has a specific task. Things like taking out a certain number of a specific enemy type, collecting data disks, and rescuing scientists. What makes it tricky at times is that there is indeed a finish line, and if you haven't completed your objective by the time you reach it, that'll be a mission failed. I think this is much more engaging than how these types of missions are handled in Spider-Man Unlimited. In that game, you get all the time you need to complete your objective, and because of that, those missions always felt too easy. In Spider-Man Ultimate Power, things get pretty damn hard later on. If you miss a data disk or something and you're already like 3/4 of the way through this progress bar here, there's a good chance the game won't throw you another data disk and you'll have to start over. I gotta be honest, this game kicked my ass pretty hard in that regard. You gotta lock in and make sure you don't miss a single objective, and that can be tricky because it often requires precise timing and placement. You can easily miss a ninja you're supposed to take out if you're at the wrong spot on the screen at the wrong time. I can't tell you how many times I missed a ninja I was supposed to take out. When you clear all the missions on the map, you'll get to face off against that zone's villain. I was pleasantly surprised with, again, how involved you are in these boss fights. The game retains its runner playstyle for these, but you still get to actually fight them. They each have their own unique attack pattern you have to pick up on to avoid getting hit, and they generally felt like a proper end cap to each zone. Like you'd expect, in between missions you can purchase upgrades that can make things a little easier, like damage boost and temporary shields. Not to mention extra costumes that have unique properties. Oh yeah, I know how much you like those extra suits. It's all about the suits. If you're low on moolah, you can jump into the survival mode where you can endlessly run and grind for credits to purchase those sweet suits. It's all about the suits. The story premise here is very simple. The villains want to jack ISO 8 to boost their powers, and man, ISO 8 really became the go-to MacGuffin for these mobile games, huh? There's really not much else to say except that I found it interesting how this particular Spider-Man is like an amalgam of different Spidey iterations. You have the title Ultimate Power, which sure, it doesn't automatically mean this game takes place in the 1610 universe, but I wanted to point it out to help my case. But you also got what appears to be classic 616 Spidey in some menus. Then the game uses this promo pic of Andrew Garfield, TASM 2 Spidey. And finally, you got these pickups that appear to be the symbiote spider logo from Spider-Man 3. I don't have anything insightful to say about that. I just found it kind of funny. And with that, we finally come to the end of this journey of covering every single Spider-Man mobile game. From the humble beginnings of a simple side-scrolling runner to the ambitious 3D open world titles that try to capture that web-slinging magic we've come to love so much. That is every Spider-Man mobile game, right? Did I miss one? Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to download Marvel Strike Force using my link in the description or QR code. Special thanks to Carlos and Sam for subscribing at the top tier. You guys are certified superheroes. I'll see you guys next time.